We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University. With undergraduate and graduate programs, part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. There is an incredible stream of stories related to the law coming out of Washington these days. They involve the president, his family, various investigations, the Supreme Court, and the highly controversial appointment of an acting attorney general. Our legal roundtable panel will get into all of it. With me in studio are attorneys Bill Freivogel, journalism professor at SIU in Carbondale. Mark Smith is associate vice chancellor and dean for career services at Washington University. And Susan Appleton is professor of law at WashU. Thank you all for being with us. Nice to see you again, Susan.
Hi.
Great to have you back with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, there's so much to talk about today. It seems so much going on in Washington. Bill, let me start with you with the flap between the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, and our president. Apparently, Chief Justice Roberts has had enough of the president being critical of judges, as he was after a judge ruled against him on the asylum issue. Right. This is really an unprecedented exchange, it seems to me.
It is. It was very surprising. I mean, I think it was an unprecedented statement for the Chief Justice to issue. As you say, it followed the president being angry about a lower court decision out in California that had put on hold his rules shutting down asylum. And Trump had tweeted that it was an Obama judge, and the Chief Justice's statement released to the Associated Press was, we don't have Obama judges or Trump judges or Reagan judges or Bush judges. We should be thankful. This was the day before Thanksgiving. We should be thankful for an independent judiciary. I think Trump had some replies about how all these cases get filed in the Ninth Circuit, which is the federal appeals court circuit that includes most of the West Coast, including California, and that they get reversed more than anybody else does. And that they're an example of biased judges. I think it is probably true that they get reversed more than other circuits, but they also get affirmed more than other circuits because more of their cases go to the Supreme Court.
But the judge in this case wasn't a member of the Ninth Circuit, was he?
He's a federal district judge within the Ninth Circuit. So yeah, right. He was not a judge on the appellate bench. He was a lower court judge.
Where does this go from here, Susan?
Well, I'm not sure where it goes from here because I can't imagine that there will be a continuing conversation through the press between the president and the Chief Justice. On the other hand, I do think this shows an appreciation by the Chief Justice of the extraordinary power he has right now as the new center Justice of the court, with Justice Kennedy's departure and Justice Kavanaugh's joining the court. All bets are that Roberts represents the new center, and I think he's trying to show some leadership in that area. He said at an earlier time that great justices are willing to put the good of the court above their own ideological agendas, and I think he's reinforcing that.
Do you think, Mark, that this is likely to have any impact, this friction between the president and the Chief Justice as the court term continues?
Well, I mean, first of all, I agree with what Susan said. I think that's exactly right, that Roberts, he wants the court to be respected. He wants to maintain its legitimacy, and he's going to be the new center. And I think that will result in probably, even when sometimes he could maybe make a big change, maybe being a little more conservative if he can bring more justices in. So trying not to have a lot of 5-4 decisions, but to have, 8-1 decisions. In terms of, what do I know what Roberts thinks? But if I were him, I would think, well, I tried to, nicely tell him, hey, this is not good for the country. That didn't work. Maybe I won't do that again.
Well, a lot of cases involving the president will be coming before the court in the foreseeable future. You just have to wonder if this friction might impact the way the justices think.
I mean, to a certain extent, what Roberts is saying is a little bit of a fiction. I mean, there certainly are important cases that are decided 5-4 with Republican-appointed justices on one side and the Democratic-appointed justices on the other, and you will have scholars like Lee Epstein at Washington University who demonstrate pretty convincingly that judges and justices often vote according to their political predilections
on some issues.
But on the other hand, it even if it is to a certain extent something of a fiction, it's a very useful fiction, and in reality, it sometimes actually plays out, truthfully. Like take the Acosta press pass decision last week. That was a Trump appointed judge with a very Republican background, and he ruled basically for CNN and Acosta. If you go back to the original travel ban, the decision out of the Ninth Circuit that threw out Trump's original version of the travel ban, that had been a Republican-appointed judge. So I do think that the members of the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary believe that they should try to not be making their decisions based on political.
I think there's a connection to another story you suggested we might discuss, which is the fact that the Solicitor General has asked that the transgender military ban challenge go directly from a district court to the U.S. Supreme Court and bypassing a court of appeals. And although that story came out a couple days after the story about Chief Justice Roberts' response, I think it signals that the administration believes it's got its team on the Supreme Court and wants to get a fast resolution there. And so I think that there's a connection between these two. And I think what Chief Justice Roberts is saying is Republicans might have appointed a majority of members of the U.S. Supreme Court, but don't necessarily assume that we'll decide cases certain ways because of that.
Well, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, I think the divisions among the judges are less about Democrat, Republican, and more about conservative, liberal in terms of how do we view the government overall? Do we view, and I think the conservative judges say this is we should have a limited government, a smaller government, that's how we should view the Constitution the way it was interpreted 200 plus years ago. And I think liberals say, no, you got to, things change. You have to be able to read that into the Constitution as well. I think those changes, and I do think even with the difference between the liberal and conservative, sometimes those you see divisions based on that, but a lot of times you don't. In most cases, you don't see those kinds of decisions, that they're just reading the law and interpreting it. So what we pay all the attention to is when there are these divisions.
Well, and you used to hear from the conservatives, more conservative judges and justices, criticisms of judicial activism, but you can find many cases of judicial activism on the right side of the political spectrum these days.
I want to get back to the transgender issue, and we'll do that a little bit later. But first, while we're talking about this relationship between the president and the courts and partisanship and what have you, Justice Sotomayor has recently come out with a statement in which she's been asking the justices to pull together and to fight to avoid political partisanship on the bench. Clearly, there is a lot of concern within the court itself about this, certainly the image part of it.
Well, the court loses legitimacy in the eyes of the American people when it appears to just be making political decisions and not be engaging into some kind of objective legal analysis. And there's nobody who cares more about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court than Chief Justice Roberts, because he's been Chief Justice already for more than a decade, and he's a young man. He wants this institution that is the Roberts Court to be perceived as one that had legitimacy and wasn't a political actor. And all the justices, Sotomayor being, and the others all believe in the importance of maintaining that legitimacy and not just being a political decider.
But isn't that unusual in and of itself to have one of the justices come out and appeal to her fellow justices to avoid this kind of partisanship?
Well,
publicly?
If she was doing exactly that, or maybe she was presenting the case for that to the public, I thought it wasn't particularly surprising for a couple reasons. First of all, as you know from your own interview of Justice Sotomayor, she's got a very open and welcoming and embracing manner. And so this seemed quite in character with the way she presents herself. And then I think she shares what Bill mentioned, namely the institutional interest in making sure that the Supreme Court remains above the political fray. That's why I thought, for example, when Justice Gorsuch made his speech about a year ago at the Federalist Society, and some news organizations called it a victory lap, that it just had a bad feel to it, because it did seem to suggest this tribalism and rivalry between the two.
That is a conservative organization that has been instrumental recently in helping the president select his justices.
Yes, and I thought what Sotomayor was saying would have not approved of that.
The legitimacy of the courts are so important, because you learn in high school civics that the president has the army. The Congress has the money, and the court just has those robes, and that's not real power like the other branches. So without the legitimacy, then we get a constitutional crisis where they say do something and people don't, and then we're in a very bad state. So it's important to keep that legitimacy.
She also, in a separate statement, officially welcomed Justice Kavanaugh to the bench, following the that hearing that we all remember so much. She's kind of like the mother of the Supreme Court right now, Big Mama Sotomayor.
And talking about family, your work family, and I didn't know that they had lunch every day. I don't know how I've missed that, but what a great idea! I mean, it's and that you have lunch and you don't talk about work. And you build these relationships, and I mean that helps me understand how Ginsburg and Scalia became such good friends.
Yeah, that surprises a lot of people. Anything more you want to say about this particular issue? Because I have to take a break. Otherwise, we'll dispense with that and move on to other things, which we will do in just about a moment. This is Legal Roundtable Day, and this is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Now back to our conversation with Susan Appleton of Washington University, Mark Smith of the same institution, and Bill Freivogel, professor of journalism at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Okay, here's one that a lot of people, I think, found fairly disquieting, and that is the revelation, and I guess it's not been totally confirmed, but seems very credible, that President Trump wanted the Justice Department to prosecute his political rivals, Hillary Clinton and James Comey. Bill, I'll come back to you on that one. Do you find that as disquieting as many people did?
Yeah, I think that's disquieting, and it appears as though it was his legal counsel who sort of saved him from taking that step and advised him, McGahn, advised him not to do it. That while he could ask for an investigation by the Justice Department, that might boomerang in terms of an impeachment issue down the road. And so, I think it's a characteristic of a non-democratic state where people who are the head of state are investigating their political rivals and the people they just defeated in the last election.
It's also, I think, a lot of people. I was talking to somebody who said, "Well, I don't get why this is a big deal. He's the president. He won. He should be able to tell his lawyers what to do, and they're not his lawyers. They're the United States' lawyers, and I think lawyers are very comfortable with this notion that you have a general counsel for a big corporation. They're not the CEO's lawyers. They're the lawyer for the corporation. CEO might have their own lawyer. President has the office of the president has a lawyer, and then Mr. Trump might have a private lawyer. But we spend a lot of time as lawyers talking about who is our client in this one, and the client of the Department of Justice is not Donald Trump, nor is it the president.
It's disturbing. Go ahead, Susan.
No, I agree with Mark that I think it shows the president's misunderstanding of his role and the role of the Department of Justice. But this isn't new. We've seen it before. I think it's connected to actually the comments we talked about a few moments ago about Obama judges versus Trump judges, suggesting that the judges report to him or do his bidding. I think it's related to his appointment of the acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, which I think we'll talk about
next,
probably later. And Trump has been quite candid about it. The president has explicitly expressed his frustrations that he can't get the Justice Department to do what he thinks they ought to do.
But you're more diplomatic than I am. What's really disturbing is the fact that this guy, doesn't know this. I mean, he's coming into this job without realizing that there are certain restrictions on what he can and cannot do.
Well, am I diplomatic or am I just trying to figure out what is going on here? And I think what's going on here, and Mark referred to this when you mentioned people don't understand it. Yeah. Certain people elected him and wanted him to do things differently. And he feels emboldened by that.
Don't you think also, I mean, he was CEO of a big corporation where had all these people telling him, great idea, boss, great idea, boss, great idea, boss. And he started thinking all his ideas were great, and I'm sure the lines were very blurred in his business world. And it's just, to him, this is no different than before. I'm in charge. I get to do what I want.
I'm the greatest.
Yeah, I'm the great. But just that I'm in charge, and that's not how this system works. Yeah. It's fundamentally different.
And I think it could have implications as in the Mueller investigation and in the investigations that various committees in the House will have now that the Democrats have a majority.
You got to love all these people, though, who are saying to him, no, you can't do that. I'm going to write you a memo that explains it all. And, I mean, that's what a lawyerly thing to do, just to write. I'm sure it was like a 10-page memo explaining how all this stuff works, and I have doubts whether it was read.
Yes, I was going to say, some of the news stories said that it's not clear whether he read it.
I mean, it'll be very interesting when the final history of this is all written on the White House counsel McGahn's former White House counsel's role in this, because it seems to me he has saved Trump on a number of occasions, in connection with this, in connection with trying to fire Sessions earlier on, and meanwhile he's been sort of the leader in getting all these conservative judges confirmed and through the Senate, including the two new members of the U.S. Supreme Court. So, I mean, he's been a little bit of a most valuable player. He's also talked to Mueller a lot. I mean, he had hours and hours of interviews with Mueller. So it'll be interesting if there is when there is a report or a final accounting, what McGahn's account of all of this is.
Yeah. Mark, you said earlier that the president should understand that the lawyers in the Justice Department don't work for him; they work for the rest of us. Well, the question now is, does he think that Matthew Whitaker, his acting Attorney General, is working for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think he thought that before. I think he thought that about Sessions. I think the more interesting question is, what does Whitaker think? Who does he think he's working for? I'm a little more worried about that because Sessions seemed to get it, that he's the United States lawyer. I'm less confident that Whitaker's going to get it.
I mean, it would seem like Whitaker should definitely recuse himself from the Mueller and overseeing the Mueller investigation because of all the comments that he made prior to going to the Justice Department. which seem to have been very much taking one side of that the Mueller investigation really wasn't proper. So I think he should take the advice that he will presumably get to recuse himself, but it will be his decision whether to take it or not. And of course, if he takes it, he'll be doing exactly the thing that made Trump so mad at Sessions. That Sessions took that advice.
And so, don't you have to think that the president had a conversation with Whitaker before he named him to find out whether he would recuse himself?
He said he didn't know him. He didn't know him.
Yeah, you would think that they did have that conversation, and you would think that somebody will try to get that. Of course, I guess Whitaker could, they could claim that was some sort of privilege, executive privilege.
Well, there are some suggestions that people on Capitol Hill would like to have this resolved with another appointment. But Whitaker's got some other baggage with him. He's accused of violating the Hatch Act by accepting campaign money while he was a federal employee. There are some ethical issues with regard to a company that he was involved in. So,
he's also kind of viewed as a little bit of a legal lightweight. I mean, not the type of person you would expect to be brought into the head of the Department of Justice.
And then there's this legal question as to whether or not can he serve as Attorney General because he has not been confirmed by the United States Senate. I mean, he was at some point in the past when he was a U.S. Attorney in Iowa, but he has not been. His chief of staff to Sessions is not a position that was confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So can he serve as an acting Attorney General or not?
Is there some limit? I've read this and I meant to research and forgot to. Is there some limit on the amount of time he can serve as acting Attorney General? I thought I saw like 200 days.
210 days.
That's sort of
well, see, there are two different arguments. The argument in favor of his serving cites the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, where Congress authorized the president to appoint someone for 210 days in a federal government role, but there are some strict limitations on that. But it seems that the president wants him to serve beyond 210 days, I imagine. The argument against the constitutionality of his appointment is the argument that Bill recited and deems him a principal officer, and therefore he would require Senate approval.
There are some different readings on that, though. Some in Washington say that is really not an issue.
And people on all political sides seem to have weighed in. There was a well-publicized editorial where Neil Katyal, the former acting Solicitor General under Obama, joined with George Conway, spouse of Kellyanne Conway, on the president's staff, to say that the appointment was unconstitutional.
There's this argument that because the law says that the assistant attorney general may act for the attorney general, that kind of overrides the Vacancy Act because it says here's the succession. But lawyers get very worked up about the difference between may and shall. Shall means you have to. May means you can, but you don't have to. And so that may or may not work.
But in any event, there are at least two suits that have been filed challenging the constitutionality of Whitaker's service in this position.
Yeah. We have an email from one of our listeners in Crestwood. You guys may or may not want to respond to her on this. She says, there are three aspects to the definition of autocrat. One, big flashy shows of power, military parades, etc. Two, a scapegoat to fear. She cites religious minorities and the immigrants. And three, a contempt for any opposing structure, such as the press or the courts. How do your guests rate President Trump on this scale?
Well, guilty in all three criteria. Yeah. Hopefully we've got hopefully have a system of government with enough checks and balances that we will get through this.
And a viable press as well.
Yeah, well, that's something he's obviously working on. Okay, we talked about Matt Whitaker. How about our own new-to-be Attorney General? What do we know about Eric Schmidt? Anybody have any thoughts about what he brings to the job?
Well, he held a statewide office before, which the governor cited in appointing him. I think he's a conservative, but I think he commands respect from the other side of the aisle. he's been out there on some various causes and issues that I think appeal to less conservative persons in the state, including his support for children who have special needs, especially autism, how he responded to some of the practices that were revealed in the light of Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, what the courts were doing. I think he's so I think he earns some respect, and I, as someone who's not on his side of the aisle, I feel optimistic.
He also worked in Josh Hawley's campaign, the man he's replacing Senate campaign, which would, I guess, attest to his conservative bona fides, right?
Yes, and so I do have some big questions. What is he going to do in the lawsuit in which Hawley had the state join with other states that were challenging the constitutionality of Obamacare now that the individual mandate has been unraveled? Will he do more to investigate former Governor Greitens and his nonprofit? So I do have some questions that I'm waiting to see answered.
Well, one of the things I've read about this is the fact that he is going to an office that has been in some disarray, was the way that it was worded, and I wonder what exactly that means. Anything specific come to mind?
See, I read that article, too, where they were talking about all the people leaving. I mean, I think it's natural when you get a change of attorney general and particularly a change of party. And when they did some comparisons of previous years, yeah, it's a little bit higher, but it didn't seem extraordinarily so. I don't know Schmidt at all. I've never met him. He went to St. Louis U Law School and worked at a couple of big firms in town. One of the things I found interesting when reading about his biography is he has a son who has special needs, health issues, and so one wonders, like you said, Susan, what will he do with Missouri's involvement with this case in Texas questioning the Obamacare? And this goes back to Roberts, too. You know, remember we talked about it on the show a couple of times, the big case that challenged Obamacare, saying it was too broad for the Commerce Clause, which is where the federal government gets most of its power from. And 4 judges were willing to say, strike it down based on Commerce Clause. But Roberts said, no, it's too far because of the taxing problem. The taxing issue saves it here. And now we had the tax changes where they got rid of the penalty for Obamacare. So now they're coming in saying, well, there's no tax penalty. That's what you said it was for. Let's do away with it. And this would mean no insurance for pre-existing conditions unless something else comes up. And so it'll be interesting to see. Schmidt seems like he's been pretty reasonable. And I wouldn't read too much into the Hawley stuff because he's the head of the party, the candidate. Everyone had to get behind him. I mean, he sounds like he was a strong supporter, but
we campaigned for
every Democrat was working for Claire. So,
I agree with Susan that the way in which Schmidt sort of responded in the wake of the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson was very much to his credit. I mean, when most of the Missouri legislature was not be able to figure out anything to do, he was able to figure out something to do, which was Senate Bill 5, I think it was called, which put a cap on how much money municipalities could raise through writing lots of traffic tickets, which was seen as one of the reforms that was needed in the wake of Ferguson. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for putting that legislation together and pulling together a coalition of across the aisle of legislators to support it, and really it's about the only thing that got past that first legislative session after. Yeah.
And I think we have to face the fact of just how red Missouri has become. So I think that against that background, someone like Eric Schmidt for Attorney General makes me somewhat more optimistic than I might be otherwise.
All right.
But what about our new governor? He goes from nobody's ever heard of him. He gets in as lieutenant governor now. 3 of the statewide offices. I mean, he's got his own and 2 other. I mean, talk about some power.
He's going to have to appoint a treasurer now.
Yeah,
too.
right.
There you go. Okay, time is tempest is fugit, as they say. I want to talk for a second about Ivanka Trump and her email situation. Looks like she's going to be investigated because of these emails she was using on government equipment. The House is going to take a look at that. Is it fair to equate what she did and how she used email with the way Hillary Clinton used email? Thoughts?
Well, President Trump is trying to distinguish it, saying, well, she didn't have her own personal server. That's the difference, and that it was much less. But it seems like at its core, it's the same kind of issue. And so, I think the Democrats are going to investigate because they can.
Yeah.
I always thought that the Hillary email issue was, for lack of a better term, a trumped-up problem. But I realize others took it much more seriously. I don't know how much traction this is actually going to get. Wasn't it just a month ago we learned that the president himself was using a cell phone that was not secure and that Russia and China were listening in? Mm-hmm. That issue has evaporated from the news. Now, maybe with the Democrats taking the House, we will see those matters investigated together. I thought there was a bipartisan inquiry into email practices recently, but I don't know where it went. So I think we're so saturated with news and
distractions.
Distractions. Yes. So I'm not in a good position to know how this will play out.
Well, and Representative Cummings has said he doesn't intend to turn it into the spectacle, but he might just be saying that. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see a couple of months or maybe even a couple of weeks or maybe even a few days down the road this having a whole lot of traction. I mean, she apparently sent a bunch of emails on her private email, right after moving into Washington and into the White House, and maybe she shouldn't have done that. But I think that, and I do think the House will be very much looking at controversies that involve the president's family, but I mean, compare this sort of minor infraction with Donald Trump Jr. meeting with agents of Vladimir Putin's in Trump Tower right before the election and trying to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. I mean, the comparison between the two is very stark.
And in all fairness, we have to point out that there was no classified information apparently involved in any of those emails. Before I take the break, Susan, you had mentioned the transgender issue a little bit earlier. One of the questions I had there was the Trump administration asking the Supreme Court to allow it to leapfrog federal appeals courts in several cases concerning this issue. I mean, how unusual is that? Just leapfrogging over another court jurisdiction.
It is unusual, and based on my reading, that can happen only upon a showing that the case is of such imperative public importance as to justify deviation from the normal appellate practice and to require immediate determination in this court. I'm not sure that this case actually fits that bill, although the Solicitor General claims that it does. The lower courts so far have found that there isn't any good reason for this ban, that it doesn't present a threat to military readiness or cohesion. The Solicitor General saying, no, the real issue is who has the authority to run the military. I don't know that that's so time sensitive that it can't go through the normal appellate process. So I see this as an effort by the Trump administration to get to a court that it believes will be more inclined to rule in its favor.
I mean, the Solicitor General saying that the lethality of the U.S. military is going to be affected by waiting another year before we solve this seems absurd. And the Supreme Court has good reasons to want things to go through the federal appeals courts first, is because it gets different views of different judges around the country about the legality of a particular practice. So they have more. It makes their decision more of an educated one.
Let's take another break. We'll come back. We have lots more to discuss, and we'll do that momentarily. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. back to our Legal Roundtable panel discussion. With me in studio, Bill Freivogel, Mark Smith, and Susan Appleton. We're talking legal issues. And Bill, I want to come back to you on this one. This is really, you are the journalism professor, a longtime journalist here in St. Louis. I wanted to talk about the Acosta case, the press credentials being lifted by the CNN correspondent. What do you make of that whole thing, the lifting of the credentials, restoring them, changing the rules along the way, by the way, when he does come back, in terms of kinds of questions that can be asked?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is sort of it was just a circus, really, in a lot of ways. I mean, I think a lot of reporters actually think Acosta's a little bit of a showboat. That having been said, I think that President Trump reacted with anger. He reacted to Acosta's question in a way, I think, also that appeals to his base of supporters. The Trump judge, I think his name is Timothy Kelly, who issued an opinion in the case, said that there's no First Amendment right of a reporter to be to have entry to the White House, to pursue a story. But once the White House has set rules has opened up the White House to press conferences, that it then can't take away the hard press pass of a journalist who's been allowed access without some sort of due process, some sort of fair process. And the judge was thought it was very questionable what the White House explanations had been, of laying hands on the intern who was trying to take the microphone from him. So, I mean, it was a victory for the press in that a judge upheld Acosta's constitutional rights to retain his press pass. The unfortunate downside of it is resulted in, I guess, some stricter rules that the president can, or the White House can try to enforce, of just one question and then a follow-up question if the president thinks that the follow-up question is appropriate. The bottom line is that the White House cannot enforce that kind of a rule in a way that targets a particular point of view or viewpoint. So we'll see how that all plays out down the road.
Susan and Bill, Mark, there's another part of this story, and that is that the White House seemingly altered a video showing that incident between Acosta and the young intern to make it look like it was something more
they
than
changed
what it
the
was.
Speed, right?
Yeah.
Did they do it, or did some other broadcaster do it, and the White House then took it on as its own?
It may have been the latter, but the White House definitely used that to back up their reason for removing the hard pass, that he had basically laid his hands on a female intern, sort of made it sound like some sort of assault.
Yes.
Okay.
But anyway, I just wanted to underscore a point that Bill made, namely that the decision by the judge was based on due process. It wasn't a broad First Amendment decision. Yeah.
And I want to note that Bill referred to the judge as a Trump judge, so he'll be getting a call from Justice Roberts anytime now.
A Trump-appointed judge.
It looks like we're going to be getting a change in sentencing and prison laws. And that's going to be good news to a lot of people who've been calling for criminal justice reform for a long time. Trump has signed on to it. President Trump has signed on to it. It seems to have bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. What is it going to mean? Mark, you're the former police board member.
That shows. I don't know that much about prison, but this is, I think, a good thing. And it's nice to see Republicans and Democrats, one, agreeing on something, two, agreeing on maybe we've gone too far with this whole law and order, be tough on criminals. So I don't think, what Trump is saying is we're not going to back off. We're going to stay tough we're going to focus our efforts on the people who really need it and back off on some of the lesser crimes where we're putting people in jail, costing everyone a lot of money, wrecking people's lives, and it's really not helping things.
It would include new funding for anti-recidivism programs, expansion of early release credits, and the reduction of certain mandatory minimums.
And trying to further reduce some disparities where there are certain laws that seem to impact African Americans much more severely than whites, and then the classic example is the difference between crack cocaine and powdered cocaine.
Sure.
And how that was treated.
Yeah, the one thing I had noticed because I was looking for it, so far I haven't seen anything indicating that the reforms will address sex offender registration requirements.
No,
and I'm interested in that because the collateral consequences of that registration are so severe that it actually seems to be standing in the way of otherwise desirable rape reform laws that would move, for example, to an affirmative consent requirement. But because of the fear that these registration requirements are so draconian, people are afraid to move the law forward.
Maybe we can have Betsy DeVos work on that for us. She wants to change the rules on college campuses.
That could be another conversation.
Right. It is interesting, to see the sort of liberal conservative working across the aisle, where you had Grassley being the big supporter of this, and Dick Durbin from across the river in Illinois negotiating with him about it. And then you had the Koch brothers Foundation was very much for this criminal justice reform. One thing, though, I don't think it's a done deal. Mitch McConnell is saying, hey, I don't know if we got time to do this. Cotton from Arkansas is very much against it. So we'll see. It's a very short window before we're into the next Congress. And in the next Congress, the Democrats would want more as part of this deal.
They go into their holiday recess in actually a matter of a week or two at the most, isn't it?
Yeah. And Trump seems to be trying to set up a, close the government or not situation over his border wall. Either I get funding for the border wall with all these asylum seekers assaulting the fence, or we close down the government. And that could use up an awful lot of the time, the small amount of time that's left before the new Congress comes in.
A couple of things here to do that we can deal with quickly, I think. Amendment 2 that was passed by voters in November, the medical marijuana amendment. It seems like some members of law enforcement or some law enforcement organizations are changing their strategies a little bit now, dealing with the marijuana possession. Jackson County prosecutors is going to stop prosecuting some marijuana possession cases. I don't know if that was an intended or unintended consequence of that particular amendment.
Yeah, because the amendment only addresses medical
right.
marijuana, and so this is broader. I know in June of this year, St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner said her office wouldn't be prosecuting cases involving 100 grams of marijuana or less unless there were aggravating circumstances. So that was even before that. So maybe this is just part of a larger trend.
Right, and I think Jackson County said if there's guns involved or large,
or kids,
we're still going to. And this is, and when you say law enforcement, I think this is the prosecutor's offices. I don't think. Unlike the sentencing, where the Fraternal Order of Police had endorsed that, which I was kind of surprised by, I don't see them saying, "Oh yeah, we're for decriminalizing marijuana," which is where this
and I think there's still federal drug crimes involving marijuana. So there's a state-federal conflict here too.
But when you go to states where it's legalized, like I was out in Washington State, there are big ads in the paper for the drugs, and with specials on, this on edibles, and then it's getting pictures.
But it's still a federal crime.
It's still a federal crime, but it sure doesn't look like it.
Jeff Sessions made that clear.
Yes. Yeah, right.
I want to take a quick call here. It backs us up a little bit, but Jeanette in Jefferson City wants to address sentencing reform from Missouri. Go ahead, Jeanette, but we're running short on time.
Hi, Don. Jeanette Mount Oxford from Empower, Missouri.
Oh, great.
We think that if Texas can close 8 prisons without hurting public safety, it's time that Missouri do this as well. And we have a panel at Washington University tomorrow night called Help Missouri Flip the Switch from being tough on crime to being smart on crime, with some diverse partners like Americans for Prosperity, and Empower Missouri and the Clark Fox Family Foundation all working together on this. Representative Shama Dogan will be there, and that's from 6:30 to 8 at Washington University, Hillman Hall, room 60.
All right. Thanks for the call. Very timely, obviously. Thank you. Moving on now, I just wanted to mention, and I don't know if this would require a lot of detail, but there's been an indictment, not surprisingly, I guess, in that duck boat tragedy near Branson last July. The captain of the duck boat, Scott McKee, has been indicted on 17 counts of misconduct, negligence, or inattention to duty, resulting in those deaths.
There was also, wasn't there a settlement on one of the civil suits?
One of the families.
Yeah, so I think we have to separate the different kinds of lawsuits we might see here. As Mark mentioned, there are going to be state wrongful death actions. I think that's the kind of claim that might have been settled recently. But the indictment is a federal prosecution that seems to be alleging violations of admiralty or maritime law, because I think negligence or inattention to duty by a ship's officer. So, and that is a federal indictment.
Yeah. The settlement was reached just a couple of days ago with Ripley, the company that owns it, and with one of the families, victims'
not all
family.
of them, right?
Just one. Yeah.
And the Missouri Attorney General, I think, has an ongoing investigation.
Yeah, Hawley did
this as well.
file that suit, obviously before the election. Okay, a little fun here. Michael Avenatti, one of our favorite lawyers. Do you think his bid for the presidency has been derailed by some of the stuff that's been going on lately? Accused of domestic violence and his law firm evicted from a high-end office?
I think his act is getting a little old if it wasn't always annoying. To have the, I guess he makes a distinction saying it's his former law firm that was evicted and he hasn't abused these women who say he abused them. And I don't see him as the next president.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is because he's a St. Louis.
He is. Yeah, for me, the jury is still out on him. I think he has exposed some significant and important facts about people in power. They would have reason to go after him and try to undermine his credibility, but maybe the information they have is valid. I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach. I have been entertained by his many TV appearances.
For those who have forgotten, and I can't imagine many have, he's Stormy Daniels' attorney. Did you want to add something to that?
No.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more, and this is what I've called the Maryland Cross situation. The Supreme Court is getting this case in Maryland. A so-called 40-foot-tall, 100-year-old Peace Cross War Memorial is being challenged as unconstitutional, supposedly a violation of church and state. Did anybody see that connection in this particular case?
Well, I think it'll be an interesting. So the Supreme Court's, I think, decided to hear this case.
Yes.
And I mean, there's all sorts of past decisions where the Supreme Court has come down one way or another on whether or not this is an establishment of religion. I mean, on the side of preserving the cross, it's about 100 years old. I think it was to memorialize World War I soldiers, so it has arguably some sort of secular purpose. I mean, I think this is a Supreme Court, the current Supreme Court is going to be much less of a separation of church and state court. So much more likely to find that that Maryland doesn't have to tear down the cross. You remember even the past Supreme Court, which was a stronger separationist court, said that and a rather, let's say, about a 50-year-old monument to the Ten Commandments that was outside this Texas State House didn't have to be taken down as a violation of church and state. And there was also a cross in the Mojave Desert that was commemorating veterans that did not have to be removed from federal land. So I think the cross has a good chance of staying.
The cases are all over. I mean, Thomas has said the cases are in a disarray. 11th Circuit said it was a hot mess, this area of the law. So I think it's...
Yeah, so I think the test for what constitutes a violation of the Establishment Clause is in flux right now, and this could be an important case that either continues the hot mess or clarifies it in some way.
There is the suggestion, I guess the lower court ruling was that the cross was an endorsement of religion simply because it's a cross.
Yes, and but others have said that the test is whether or not something like this would be found in our history and tradition, and it's old enough that maybe it qualifies. Right.
And people have also suggested that the cross is representative of what we see on all of the graves in the cemeteries, the national cemeteries. We've got to let it go at that. I want to thank you all so much for being with us. Lots to discuss today, lots on the national level, obviously, but there is a lot going on. Susan Appleton, great to see you again.
Great
Thanks
to see
for
you,
being
too.
with us. Mark Smith,
good to see you.
As always. And Bill Freivogel, same to you.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.